Don't put your yield at risk. Put your trust in proven solutions. Anvil Nitrogen Stabilizer, Super U Premium Fertilizer, and Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. These products offer higher active ingredient concentrations imitator brands can't match. See the difference at defendyourn.ca.
The Agronomist is brought to you by the Canola School, Farming Forward, and the Farm Safety Roundup. Keeping safety front of mind is all about communication. With agriculture expertise to help keep farmers, their families, and their workers safe, the Farm Safety Roundup is a podcast series focused on important conversations with a team of ag specialists at Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. Visit realagriculture.com or download from wherever you get your podcasts. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Agronomists. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. I am also incredibly on time, and I'm going to take that as a win. It feels like winter didn't get the memo that it was time to move on, and we would all like to get to green up and getting a crop in the ground. And of course, that is going to come with a whole bunch of questions. If you've got a cover crop out there, what do you do with it? And so that's tonight's episode. Before we get to that, though, of course, for those of you who collect those CEU credits, head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists. You can let us know tomorrow that you watch the program. We'll get you those CEU credits. And while you're there, you can sign up for our email that will remind you of upcoming episodes. Send a link, of course, to the episode as well, and remind you to sign up for those CEU credits. So fill that out while you're there. Thanks to everybody joining us in the comments already. Mark says he's joining us from an evening campfire. It must be much, much warmer where Mark is. Hi to Woody, also to Margaret and Ray, of course, joining us from Calgary. And Margaret is here for a very special reason. So before we bring in our guests, do want to let everybody know tonight's episode does count as a knowledge sharing event. If you're in Ontario and you are part of the OFCAF program or have funding and need a knowledge sharing event credit, tonight's episode does count. So at the end of the evening, we are going to put up a slide. You can get in contact with Margaret May. She will take down your information and get you that KSE, that knowledge sharing event credit that you need for your funding. So there you go. I see Scott is here, 20 degrees. He must not be far from one of my guests tonight. All right, let's bring them in. Without further ado, we got a full lineup tonight. Starting in the West, Kevin Elmy with Cover Crops Canada, based in Alberta. Scott says it's about 20 degrees there. Kevin, is that what it is where you are?
20 degrees. It's horrible.
Yeah. Sounds
not
terrible,
minuses. The snow's going. It's getting a little dry, but we'll get some moisture before seeding. Well, unless you're down at Lethbridge or Scott, and they're going.
Maybe not. All right. We won't hate on you too much for the 20 degrees. Our day will come. And Jim McComb joining us from Ontario. Jim, how you doing?
Great. It's been a warm day, but we got some spits and almost some snow as I finished chores before coming in for this. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's taking its jolly sweet time.
Anytime.
Yeah. And Jake Munroe with OMAFA joining us as well. Yeah, you're welcome, Jake.
Happy to be here, Lyndsey.
All right. Now, Jake, this is, of course, that interesting time between the conference season has sort of cooled off. We're waiting to get a crop in the ground, getting perhaps a little antsy for some of us. But what is keeping you busy these days? Are you doing a lot of talks like this, or what keeps you busy right now?
Yeah, these are starting to kind of wind down. I think I've got one or two more after this, and I'm kind of putting my head towards some of the field trials that I've got, and making sure that I'm, I guess, well prepared on my end to come and set things up and collect the right data once the plots are seeded. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm working on over the next few weeks.
All right. Okay. Now, Jim, thank you for being here, because you, of course, bring the agronomist perspective, but you're my fellow livestock person here. So I want to put it out there, everybody. It's okay to ask questions that are in regards to grazing cover crops and or harvesting them for forage, right, Jim? This is an important part. We're going to talk about that too.
Very value added. It's definitely the way to go, and maybe if you yourself can't use it, a neighbor can, right?
Mm-hmm. It is okay that everybody wins. Everybody, it's okay. Okay, now the cover crop question, though. I mean, obviously, Kevin, I'll start with you because in Ontario we've got a pretty long growing season, sometimes incredibly long. We've got ample moisture. So now I'm bragging, even though it's not 20 degrees here. But Kevin, you spent a lot of time in Saskatchewan, now in Alberta. Give us the lay of the land on cover crops of where they're fitting into rotation.
So yeah, the livestock number one way to justify cover crops is get some critters to graze it, so that this way, it's really easy to do the economics of it when we start talking about we got so many days of grazing, we got so many bales, so many tons of silage, versus trying to figure out, okay, so we increase water infiltration by 10%, we've reduce the amount of annual weeds. We've, all of those subjective type of measurements for as a grain producer. So it is a little tougher. So when we're going through and developing these cover crops, the fall seeded cover crops are highest risk. When we start looking at the relay cover crop, so getting the cover crop seeded the same time as a cash crop for the grain guys, that is the most consistent process of getting these things up and going. But we always have to be a opportunist, so that when there's an opportunity, and especially now with the development of drone seeding, it just opens up new opportunities to get out and there's a weather system coming through, load the drone up and get out and get something seeded. So on our farm in eastern Saskatchewan, 1,500 acres, I would hook onto the air seeder May 1st, and in November, usually I would unhook from it because I was always looking for that opportunity to get something else seeded. So, for the standpoint of the highest and easiest way to get into the cover cropping, find some species that work with your cash crop that will continue growing after harvest, adding that plant diversity, having that living root, and everything else starts to fall into place.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jake, that's sort of kind of the opposite, but not entirely, of what we do in Ontario, where we tend to target after a crop or ahead of a crop, depending on how you look at it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not necessarily seeding at the same time, and certainly with drones we can do that. But Jake, when we're talking about integrating cover crops, and tonight we're talking about terminating them because that's a key part of it. How much of the terminating part has to come into play when you're planning at the beginning?
Yeah, probably a fair bit. And anybody, I know I see lots of familiar names in the chat, and I know there's many experienced cover croppers listening in. I think that probably comes with experience for anybody who's farming. And from my perspective as an extension specialist, learn that pretty early on, kind of seeing some things not go right. And so I think it's probably a lesson really only needs to be probably learned once. That kind of not only just how are you going to terminate it, but what kind of growth are you shooting for, and then how are you going to manage that residue? Is that is that fit within your system, or do you need to do something else with it? Do you need to and I've have scenarios where, like Jim mentioned, it wasn't planned, but it's been taken off for feed because there's too much growth there, and there's a neighbor, and that worked out well. But yeah, terminating, I think, is thinking that through is a really big part of having success, because obviously it's on the short term, it's not the cover crop that's going to really pay the bills. It is the following cash crop, and so that's the key to success, is setting up well for that.
Mm-hmm. And also sometimes when you wait for Mother Nature to kill it, she doesn't always kill it. So plants are incredibly resilient. So we do have to talk about that backup plan at times. But Jim, let's, with your experience in working with growers and of course on your own farm as well, as Jake has sort of alluded to it, when you're working with covers, is it similar with Kevin, where livestock are part of that conversation from the get-go, or is that still a kind of a separate conversation that some farmers are having, but isn't part of the plan necessarily?
I think it works really well if you can plan ahead. We definitely want to look after our crop rotation and our herbicide rotation, so we don't plant a cover crop that's not compatible with our herbicide rotation. So really, in my eyes, the cover crop starts the 2026 cover crop. You need to plan that now so you don't put a herbicide down like Pursuit or an atrazine dose that's a little too heavy that will terminate your cover crop before it even gets out of the ground. And then the livestock part comes in when we've got great growth. It really helps if if we're in a feed shortage situation, a cover crop can swoop in after that beautiful wheat crop and have a good time to grow and a good amount of sunlight and moisture to create a huge amount of biomass that maybe like necessitates, like Jake says, that removal. So it's livestock's a big part, and we have some cool tools to pasture it pretty easy now too.
We sure do. Mark says 75% of our oats and radish survive the winter, even after a cutting and some grazing. And that is one of the things we will talk about tonight, is all the different ways, of course, we can terminate. They don't always work 100% of the time, or maybe they have to work together. And no one said the T word yet, but yes, we'll talk about tillage too. We have to, whatever. Okay, but Kevin, I want to come back to, and we do have some great images, and Jake's got some great slides that we're going to go over. But Kevin, when I think about, this idea of putting the cover crop, sort of underseeding it to the grain crop, and then it takes off sort of once the annual crop has come off. Are you having decent success with that? Is that the most successful way that growers are using it, or are you seeing, the seeding it later in the year and having it go from there? What does it sort of look like?
So yeah, it all goes back to what the goals are, what crops you're growing, all of those things. So, what we've seen really good success is with the cereals. In the areas with good moisture, we put in some Italian ryegrass with the cereals. In the drier areas, we're putting in some winter triticale or winter wheat in with the spring cereals, so that this way it stays vegetative all season. For us, the Italian ryegrass normally winter kills, overwinters somewhat in the Lethbridge area in patches. But normally, I like picking species that are biennial and they winter kill, so that this way, this whole termination thing, we got Jack Frost to deal with it. One of the other things we can do is, if we do have an early crop like peas that we take off, or a winter cereal, one of the options is to go in with a spring cereal like oats, seed it in the middle of August. Normally we get a killing frost by the middle of September, so that this way, once again, we let nature do the termination. And this way, once again, takes one more pass of herbicide off the land. So those are some of the things. The 1 year, well, on the cover of my book is a cover crop, is a full season cover crop with the annual clovers, with a little bit of Phacelia, a little bit of pearl millet, underseeded to perennial ryegrass, and the perennial ryegrass was my cash crop the next year. So I forgave a crop in that year, and once again, could you put critters out there? Well, it wasn't fenced, there wasn't water, there's issues, but I wanted to see if I was able to fix enough nitrogen to grow perennial ryegrass without buying anything. And then the next year we got an inch of rain, and well, it wasn't a complete failure as compared to what everybody else was talking about. So.
I will, and we can touch on it, and I will say, not having fences and water is a holdup, but not insurmountable. We can talk about that, but it definitely is. And when we're talking about 1,000 acres versus 100 acres, also a different discussion, everybody. Okay, Garrett shares they're in the same boat as Mark, where they've seen plenty of overwintering on oats. Certainly, we've seen that for the past couple of years with mild winters as well. For the most part, we've gone to spring either right before head or after we take the forage off. Jake, I'll go to you first on this one. oats do seem to be very much a go-to when it comes to cover crops. And for the most part, we expect them usually to die, but they also are one that likes to surprise us every once in a while. So what has your experience been with some of the trials that you've done in, is there, or what's the risk to having some of these oats grow maybe too long in the spring and potentially get in the way of the crop we want to grow?
Yeah, so I have not done any trials on oats, but I guess just kind of thinking about the comments I've heard from growers, I guess as far as I'm aware, last year was kind of the big year where we did see a lot of overwintering oats and tillage radish and some other stuff from the mild winter. And then I guess this year we probably got a good amount of snow cover before we got the colder temperatures. So that's likely where we're seeing it. And I guess from conversations, my impression last year was that that the oats that did overwinter, it's not that they were super vigorous or that the full stand overwintered and it was a really thick thing to manage. So I think I think if you get on there and thinking of it similarly to cereal rye, though it doesn't have the same allelopathy that cereal rye does, but just being aware if you're going into corn of getting it terminated in a timely fashion if you haven't already sprayed it in the fall. I think that would be a very reasonable approach as long as you got a soil type that allows you to get on a decent amount of time in advance of planting. It's going to be I would think less antagonistic to the to the following corn crop than rye would. I think in this conversation about fall termination, though, I think it's often the winter wheat that creates a bit more of the challenge in terms of whether it's in terms of tillage, creating a good seed bed, potentially pest issues, other challenges like that.
Mm-hmm. Jim, you're nodding along.
Yeah, we seen oats over winter, and last year we also seen the weeds over winter pretty good too. They didn't have that chill that they needed to knock them down. So you might be out there anyways with a control program of some type. And I'd say, knowing Garrett's farm a little bit, he's likely got some pretty good fertility, and I think that helps oats over winter easier than a low fertility situation too.
Mm-hmm. Garrett, it's my understanding there are some dairy cows in that rotation, which means there's some manure in that rotation, which means he's probably got really good ground. And so that sometimes are the good things can be a hindrance to some of the things we're trying to do. Reynold shares that the oats die, but crimson clover survive. Reynold, maybe let us know where you're at. Dan asks, I have a producer that seeds triticale after soybeans for forage seed in the spring with intensive management for dairy in southwestern Ontario with good success. Triticale is a favorite of mine. I know a lot of people say triticale. It's not. It's triticale. It was developed at the University of Manitoba. It is a cross between rye and wheat. It's always fun to see it here, both winter or spring. Okay, so Gore's got a great question about grazing that we will get to in a minute. But Mark says the experts suggest that we terminate in the spring. I have terminated in the fall before, but listen to the experts this season. Now I'm scratching my bald head. Is that how it got bald, Mark? I don't know. Okay, so but this is a really good question. And to me, I want to back this up a step. And Kevin, Jim, feel free to jump in. But Jake, I'll start with you. Why would we want to leave a cover crop as long as possible?
Yeah. So, and I'm sure Kevin and Jim will both have comments on this. I guess my perspective on it has always been it's not a fit in every situation, but where you leave a cover crop growing into the spring, something overwintering, you've got more time with roots, you've got more time building biomass, and for certain types of species, the spring is where they put on the majority of their growth. So hairy vetch would be an example, cereal rye and any of the other winter cereals. So you're getting opportunity for additional growth, starting from green up right until whenever that termination happens. And then weed suppression is a big one, especially for the winter cereals. You're having an opportunity to compete with winter annuals, helping to where resistant fleabane is an issue. Certainly rye has been shown in Ontario to be quite helpful with suppression, not doing everything on its own, but with suppression with a good herbicide program. Those are a couple of the big ones. So helping to build organic matter soil structure and competing with weeds are the big ones that come to mind for me.
Mm-hmm. Kevin, maybe I'll go to you first. Does that list really change with Western Canada? What is the risk to leaving a cover too long?
So back in my wisdom, when I had some winter triticale that was overwintering, and it was a couple per square meter, so it wasn't really dense. And then Scott sent over one of those Lethbridge clippers. So they were forecasting early May for the Yorkton area to be, low 30s for temperatures and a 60K wind. So I thought, I'm so smart. I have this cover crop that's volunteering. It's coming up. It's going to protect the ground. I am so smart. Didn't realize that, number one, it wasn't going to rain till July. Number two, that as this triticale was growing and was, covering the ground, creating that cover, when I went in to seed my cover crop, the top, 2 inches was dry because I wasn't evaporating water, but I was transpiring water. So in hindsight, what I should have done is when I had enough cover from the triticale, went out, sprayed it or crimped it, killed it, create the armor, stop the evaporation, stop the transpiration, and then I would have been further ahead.
Yeah.
So I was lucky to spend 5 days with Dr. Christine Jones, that'd be 2 winters ago. And now what the thought process with the legacy effect, so the effect of the shared biome of previous crops. In the past, it was thought we had to have that living root in the spring. And it's when we start looking at excess spring water, when we look at priming that soil with the root exudate to get the microbiology going, so we can seed green into it. That's those are real things that we really want to do. But what Christine Jones was talking about was that if we go in and we terminate it in the fall, we're getting the same benefits as having it over winter from the microbiome standpoint. So that was reassuring, so that this way, Western Canada, we can get a little on the dry side. And so this way we can create that armor, create a relatively wide carbon to nitrogen ratio if weed suppression is the issue. But yet, in 2010 to 14, we were getting about 40 inches of rain during the growing season, where our normal average is around 8. So we were a little on the wet side, so we weren't seeding until July. I was seeding cover crops, and the cover crops would get, just above the knee. And when the pictures of our high-tech zero-till equipment come up on the screen, you'll see some of my limitations of equipment. But yet, when this cover crop was knee-high at freeze-up, then it was below the knee. By spring, we went out with light harrows and just touched it, and because we didn't have lignification, the residue broke down, and we were able to seed into it with no problem. So, part of this management system is, okay, what are you trying to do? What are your goals? And what is your equipment? What's your limitations?
I'll have you know, my years in Saskatchewan were 2009 to 2012. I brought all the rain, and I apologize. So I left, and anyway, it got better. So that was my
Then
fault.
we turned into a drought.
I'm sorry. I brought it, and then I left. Okay. All right. We're going to pause for just a moment, and we're going to hear from one of our show sponsors, and then we'll get back to our conversation on terminating cover crops right after this. The Agronomist is brought to you by Farming Forward, the Farm Safety Roundup, and the Canola School. From pre-seeding seeder setup and checks to pest ID and advice on nutrient management to tips on determining swath timing, Real Agriculture's Canola School covers every facet of the canola growing season. The Canola School is made possible through sponsorship by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola. Learn more at canolaschool.com or find the videos on YouTube. All right, sorry, I dance every time. Okay, so Mark's got a good question, and Jake, we're gonna pull up some of the slides of some of the work that you've done, because the question of when to terminate and how effective that termination is, etc., as we've discussed, it definitely can have an impact on potential the seed bed, on weed suppression, etc. Some of those are benefits and some of those are drawbacks. So I definitely want to talk about that. So in a moment, but Mark says ours is pretty dense in areas. My concern is terminating. This is the triticale, I think. right? Terminating it now, or oats, it now, and turning it into a mat that won't let our clays dry enough for planting. I'm thinking I should have tilled it in the fall to expose soil. Mark, you're making me say tillage. But okay, so Jim, how would you, let's start there, and then I want to go to Jake's slides. But so oats that didn't winter kill, if you terminate, let's say early spring, have you had experience where it creates kind of a mess for planting, or are we going to be okay?
Yeah, we're the oats last fall grew exceptionally well, and Mark has he's not too far away from me. He has a few more heat units than I do, so that huge biomass, it's going to harbor some stuff that we don't really want around. The slugs are going to be in under there possibly, and those heavy clays. So your hunch is maybe right, Mark. And I'm not a big tillage guy at times, but it sure has to hurry up and break down. I just walked a field locally here that had we harvested part of the farm and left the oats in part of the farm, and the mat is just massive, and the soil's very squishy out there right now. I'm going to throw a wheat peat saying do no harm for
Right.
the next crop. So we were at the edge of risking, and terminating as soon as we can would be great. Maybe there's we can't spray with drones. I forgot. Yeah, we
Yeah,
can't
that's right.
terminate with drones.
We
But
can't.
just
No.
to pop in, I see that
Yeah.
Mark is saying his concern is it's pretty dense, like the overwintering oats, if I'm understanding
That's right.
correctly. And
Yeah, it's the
concern
oats, I
is that
think.
if he terminates it now, that he's going to have
Yeah.
quite a mat. Yeah. On those clays. On those clays, I guess that's where I think I saw Woody add in the chat there of the kind of watching your seeding rate and the density, and also we just had such an open fall, kind of unexpected open fall. I think you mentioned, Kevin, killing frost in mid-September. Some areas we didn't get till mid-November killing frost, and so those oats did put on a lot of extra growth. I share your concern, Mark, I guess, with if you got a lot of growth, of just going out and spraying it at the first chance as well, because then you're not transpiring any more moisture. So it depends what tillage options you have available as well, in combination with that, and what the weather does if it does start warming up and drying up a bit.
Yeah. I was going to say, if we could have the weather straighten out and start getting some warmth and sunshine, please, maybe we wouldn't be quite so concerned, because that soil could dry out with some good sunshine and a stiff breeze. But I don't think we're going to get that anytime soon. I keep hoping.
So as one question here, in Southern Ontario, instead of using cool season grasses, what happens if we switch to warm season grasses, or does that not work?
It's a good question. So Jake, take it away. I have some thoughts on warm seasons. But,
or Jim, you want to start, Jim, because you've probably done some stuff with sorghum grass.
We've grown sorghum. It's a beautiful crop. It grows so fast when it's warm, and it shuts down so easy. It'd be a cool experiment for Mark after wheat, but sometimes it won't work. It's we maybe have it too dry right after wheat harvest and into that August season. You really got to play it by ear with cover crops and adapt to the situation. So some years it'll work.
It is very sensitive to frost, everybody. Like, that is not one that if you get a touch of frost, you're like, oh, it'll be fine. Oh no, it is water. It is not happy. We've had sorghum standgrass, and definitely, if you've got a nice open fall, like, wow, it's great. But just a sniff of 0 degrees, and it goes and dies.
And I was thinking more of the millets than the sorghum, because sorghum you also have to deal with prussic acid that always concerns me.
And that was a concern for us as well. We ended up not grazing that off because of those sorts of things. And there are some millets. I would love to know if anybody's got experience in the chat with using millets. We have not a lot. It isn't as popular here, Kevin. Okay, but while we're going through that, producer Jay, if you would, could you bring it Jake's slide 1? Because Jake, you've done some really cool research here in Ontario about the impacts of termination date, and again, that you're right, wheat peas do no harm, which Pete is not here, by the way, and I started on time. I would just like to state that for the record. Anyway, but Jake, walk us through some of these trials. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so this is work done looking at termination timing before soybeans being planted. So you can see there, if you look really close, it's from across 13 different replicated trials, mostly on-farm trials, across 4 different seasons. And the takeaway here is that at the trials that we did, and they were done some in Eastern Ontario, most in the Southwest, found that there was no statistical difference between spraying the rye off a couple weeks ahead of planting versus planting right into it and spraying it off either just before or within a couple days after. A couple things to add. We also did kind of later stage of the project. We had strips treatments in there that included no rye at all. And again, no difference there. I don't have it on the graph, but no difference there in terms of soybean yield. But you can push this system too far. So I'm sure the couple photos you see there actually they are from the same site, and they show one of those 13 sites where there was no yield difference despite a 1 or 2 growth stages lag in development in the rye there you can see, and then actually that carried forward through to maturity. You can see the strips on the right hand side. So a consideration, if you've got a thicker mat of rye, this particular one was seeded after corn silage and was a nice on this rolling topography is really nice to protect that soil from erosion and do some good things. But it did, if you were seeding wheat after that, it would delay wheat seeding a little bit. I guess the one final thing to add on this is that this was done over 4 growing seasons. We have in recent memory had, I think it would have been 2023, very dry start to the year. And we have had instances where soybeans, we're going to, I think, touch on that a little bit more, Lyndsey, in the second half, had this cover crop suck the moisture right out of the top couple inches, as Kevin had alluded to as well. That can happen in Ontario too at certain times of the year, and that can delay soybean emergence, and in some cases not captured in this trial work, but that can negatively impact yield. So generally speaking, we did find planting greens perfectly fine. We don't tend to have the kind of open enough season in the fall or spring to get the massive amount of growth they sometimes will get in the Midwest out of a cereal rye cover crop. And so, in many cases that was pretty modest growth, but giving some nice benefits. And again, slight delay in maturity, but otherwise equivalent yields.
Now, and did you take weed suppression data from these same trials? Were there observation counts done on that
too? A little bit. More of the weed suppression work was done on kind of a spin-off trial where we looked at seeding that rye earlier and thicker and using a roller crimper to terminate it, and doing some no-till organic trials. And certainly in that we saw some really big benefits in terms of weed suppression. But yeah, we did have a little bit. My colleague Mike Cobra had helped me out with that at Laura Research Station, and I've shared some photos and other talks and articles you can find on Field Crop News. We did find reduced weed recruitment and basically shorter, less developed weeds at the time of burn down, where you've got some rye and kind of, the thicker the rye is or the later it is that you terminate it, the more of that effect you get. And studies across North America have found that it's all a balancing act, as you know, Lyndsey, in terms of soil moisture and other factors. Yeah.
The proverbial, it depends. But fascinating though, in that there does seem to be at least a bit of wiggle room then, that there is a window to terminate the rye. It's not like if you've missed the early termination that you've hooped yourself for the whole year. Like there is a bit of wiggle room.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd say the only instance where we found that you really could overdo it across the 13 trials we did is where we actually delayed termination 2 full weeks after planting the soybeans to get even more growth. And on a dry year, that took off 4 to 5 bushels in doing that.
Okay. Jake, can you go to the next slide for us? Jim, what has your experience been with, spring termination? Same idea? Like, have you also observed, some wiggle room, but leaving it too late, definitely no good?
Yeah, there's definitely some wiggle room, and when you're in the game in spring, you kind of have to look at your soil moisture. Like Jake says, you don't want it pulling too much out because it can bite you in the rear end pretty quick. So when that rye hits its reproductive stage and starts putting a head on, it's pulling a massive amount of moisture out really quickly, much the same as a mature wheat crop or a mature corn crop. It's got a lot of root down far, and it'll leave the top so dry that it makes seeding depth difficult, and it can make definitely leave the next crop lacking enough moisture to start or really flourish early on.
Now, Jake, we talked about rye before soybeans, which seems relatively typical. I know quite a few farmers that are having great success with it. Corn seems to be a different beast, though. What are we looking at here, or just generally speaking, how are farmers incorporating cover crops into corn seeding, planting? Sorry.
Yeah, so in Ontario, at least the growers that I interact with, or my general impression is that the vast majority of farmers doing cover crops ahead of corn are doing something that's either going to winter kill or doing fall termination with a herbicide. That said, there are a subset of growers who are either leaving something to grow into the spring for termination, maybe on lighter soil types, or planting green. And so having, in many cases, a kind of a mixture. A lot of growers moved away from having rye in that mix, or maybe just having it at a very light rate, and then leaving it right up to planting right into it. Having in most cases with the experienced growers, modified their planter pretty significantly to handle that kind of residue, and then spraying it off shortly after, and either in some cases doing fall strips or maybe spring strips, but in a lot of cases, no-till. So what you're looking at here is just one set of photos from 5 different fields I followed in the 2023 growing season in southwestern Ontario. And this is on Field Crop News, and then there's a video on the Corn School from about a year ago, kind of profiling these. But this one site I just wanted to show of kind of a grower who's kind of pretty dialed in and has really got this system working nicely, and has incorporated a lot of management aspects in having success. Like this, he achieved almost a full stand of what he seeded. The growth was quite uniform. There's the odd issue in this field, but nothing that was too problematic or yield limiting, and ended up yielding quite well, across the farm in this season with corn planted this way. Pretty typical for growers to be including something like a crimson clover and an oat base, but with something like crimson clover, maybe hairy vetch if they're comfortable with that, like some legumes, maybe with Austrian winter pea or something to that effect.
Now, when I look at that June 21st picture, so obviously this was, terminated, sure. Was there an advantage to like weed control? Like, was that weed control for the season, or was there still weed control that happened after that?
Yeah, so there's that was, so I got a little bit of the data here on this one. Like the burn down along with the residual herbicide was applied on May 23rd, so a few days after planting. And I'd have to go back and look at my notes. I'd imagine there might have been an additional post application. Okay. But there's, like with anything, there's trade-offs, right? So with what we know now, we're a good few years into more widespread. This being a bit more of a widespread practice, research done in the States and in Canada as well. You are competing more with weeds, early emerging weeds, but you're also getting some reduced in terms of your residual getting down to the soil. Of course, you've got quite a canopy there, and so there is going to be a reduction in the amount of herbicide that's getting down that you want active in the soil. And so generally speaking, not a lot of work done on these multi-species mixes, but generally speaking, with a kind of rye-based cover crop, you kind of what you lose in terms of residual activity and the herbicide getting down under the canopy, you kind of gain with that different mode of action with the competition and the allelopathy. This is pretty emerging with these multi-species mixes and exactly how we manage these to the maximum. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It looks really pretty by July. That's what's important to keep in mind, everybody. It'll look terrible and everyone will think you're crazy. And then it looks nice. So it's fine.
Well, Lyndsey, this is the best one, but you got to remember there's some
Jake,
other photos too.
You're ruining it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we can talk about the things that didn't work either. But speaking of
beholder, I love that.
Yeah. See, Okay, so producer Jake, could you go to Kevin's second photo, please? Because speaking of delightful biomass, and goodness, I wish I had cows to turn out on it. But tell me the story of this field. What are we looking at here? What are we trying to do? What are you seeding here?
So I loaded up. This is be seeding the last little bit of August, and this would have been back in about 2008. This would be the second cover crop that I seeded, and so I seeded some spring oats and I seeded some radish, and that was seeded in the end of July. So it had about a month of growth, and I was seeding winter triticale into it. And so this is my high-tech zero-till drill that I was using. It's a 1986 8800 Borgo air seeder. I was using a hole opener, a 1 3/4 inch hole opener, and I had gang packers. And the thing I found out was 2 pounds of radish in with the winter cereal was too high because those big leaves flopped out and landed on the surface when they died. And as they were rotting, they're giving off organic acids, and they killed my winter triticale that was growing underneath it. But these are the things, so you can see the damage I'm doing behind. The winter hardiness was, that is a concern in eastern Saskatchewan, and there was the only time the winter triticale died is where those leaves from the radish were landing on it.
Yeah. So if this were, let's say this had been 2024 this past year, what would you do differently with a crop like this?
So with the winter the winter hardiness of our oats, they will never overwinter. They may sprout in the spring because if they didn't germinate. So once again, opportunistic. So that the moisture was good in July, so I went out and I seeded my cover crop, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't seed it too early, so it didn't get too much growth. The residue, because we're dealing with a tight seed-to-end ratio, even though it's 3 feet high, it rotted down and disappeared our soil biology was cranking it at such a high level of activity. Even when we grow the triticale and it's eyeball high and we harvest it and all the straw goes back in the soil surface without any tillage, by June the next year it is all gone. So it's amazing when we get our soils up and going and functioning and get the biology behind it, how quickly this residue will rot.
Mm-hmm. Feed the soil bugs, y'all. Okay, I'm going to pause here for just a moment. We're going to throw to our clip for tonight, which is Brett Israel talking about terminating covers in the organic system that he uses. We'll hear from our last read of the night, and then Jim and I are going to talk about our favorite way to terminate cover crops. Okay, after this.
Now, as an organic farmer, chemical termination is not necessarily an option when it comes to cover crops. What are your options when it comes to termination?
So that's one of the best questions. How are we going to terminate cover crops when we're not using synthetic chemistry to do so? And it's definitely taken a fair bit of learning to get to a point that we feel comfortable. I think a lot of folks look at maximizing biomass as the main objective of cover crop growth. And that might work in some situations, but when we're not using synthetic nitrogen, we really have to manage the cover crops and terminate them properly so they don't get too growthy.
Overall, how do you assess the impact cover crops and your ability to manage them has and will have on the future of 3Gen Organics?
So cover crops are a tool, and like any tool, if they're used properly, they can have some fantastic results. We have seen that we can be growing 70 plus bushel per acre organic soybeans with no row crop cultivation when we utilize that cereal rye cover crop. We can also be growing 240 bushel an acre corn if we have a really succulent legume cover crop that's preceding it. Both covers can help to suppress weeds, that keep the soil alive. At the same time, though, we've also had some disasters where, if that rye isn't cut and we're roller crimping, we could be seeing 15 bushel an acre beans. Or if that cover crop's managed before corn, that 240 turns into 100 bushel an acre pretty quickly. One of the things that we've been looking at is a multi-pronged approach dependent on the situation. So if we're going to be focused on growing a cereal rye cover crop where we want it to overwinter, we have had really good success letting that rye overwinter, cutting it for forage in the middle of May, letting the stubble regrow for a week to 2 weeks, and then working it with shallow high-speed disc passes to effectively open up the root balls and let them dry out. We can then seed soybeans in that situation start of June. If we're going to be talking about a really nice red clover stand that we want to plant corn into, we are moldboard plowing that down in the fall preceding our corn crop, and that allows us to have excellent clover termination and a really beautiful seed bed to plant the next year's corn crop into. So different contexts depend on the situation.
Thank you to the Agronomist show sponsors, Farm Safety Roundup, the Canola School, and Farming Forward. Farming Forward is a video series brought to you by the Farm Resilience Mentorship Program. Sharpen your soil health expertise with cover cropping, nitrogen management, and advanced grazing. Head to realagriculture.com, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right. So Mark points out that the government cover crop programs I'm aware of lean highly towards spring termination. And part of that reason is there is some language, everybody check it out, but there needs to be enough biomass heading into the winter, into freeze up, for it to qualify for the off-calf program. So that is a key component of this, and has had, it has probably created some headaches for some growers. Jim, your thoughts on what we could be doing in the fall to terminate these crops?
Yeah, so if we want to address the livestock portion, I see some talk about C to N ratio, and a great way to change your C to N ratio is some livestock. They're gonna take in some high C product like oats or cereal rye, and they're going to convert it to a high nitrogen product that has bacteria in it to start breaking down some of the residue. And the tramping mechanism that sheep or cattle have really has a benefit of starting the breakdown process also. So we're really, making a full circle system in which we use in livestock, even in their pastures. Managing the height of the cover crop can be beneficial. You don't have to pasture it right down so they're biting the dirt, and of course managing the nutrition side with the cattle. You might have to look after supplemental nutrition and some minerals depending on what the cover crop is.
Mm-hmm. Producer Jay, could you bring up Jim's slide 2? But we'll touch on slide 1 as well. I did want to mention, Jim, Gold Star for mentioning sheep as well as cattle, because yes, they also eat cover crops. But I will just share, and most people know this as well, but it is something that we have been doing for several years now. Once our sheep come off the solar site, or our ewe lambs are weaned, they go on to other farmers' cover crops that are usually put in after a winter wheat crop comes off. And we use temporary fencing, solar energizers, but sheep don't drink as much water as cattle. So the water component's still important. We do provide them water, but it is nothing compared to what you have to set up for cattle. So that is a consideration. But Jim, I did want to talk about, and Jake, Kevin as well, hop in here. Is one of our answers here, Jim, do we need to do a plow in the fall, which just makes my skin crawl? I'm sorry, everybody. Or can we help the process along if we harvest either with livestock or with a forage wagon, whatever it might be? What experience have you had with, harvesting this crop in the fall on the termination problem?
Yeah, so harvesting, this is from the past year. The first picture is from Owen Lake's farm in Sterling. Owen was kind enough to allow me to use this photo. And we've got a mix of vetch and peas and rye in that picture. in which Owen takes it off in the spring with forage harvester, and things have to happen pretty quick in that situation, right? You don't back to Pete's do no harm saying. You don't want to really stretch into your good corn growing season with your cover crop, and it's somewhat the same with in the second picture. This is a farm that I had an agreement with a neighbor. They grew wheat on it. They no-tilled oats into it, and we spread biosolid pellets on it. So we had a nitrogen source there to enrich the current cover crop, and we're also conscious of the next crop that's going to be grown. There's data around, and Jake, you likely have it at your fingertips on using 50 pounds of nitrogen on a cover crop in the fall, so we don't impact the yield the next spring on a crop.
Yeah. Dr. Dave Hooker's long-term cover crop trial that's been going now for 7-8 years, if I'm remembering correctly. And yeah, exactly, Jim. Like the data so far from that trial is finding that that if you don't fertilize, and that's not in a livestock system, right? That's just grains and oilseeds. But if you're not fertilizing that with that 50 pounds of nitrogen, that those oats are kind of nitrogen deficient, and then where they follow through to the next year and they have a 0N plot for that corn, and that corn suffers more from nitrogen deficiency of having had kind of those oats there take the last little remnants of nitrogen out of the profile. So having manure with cover crops is an awesome combination to potentially even carry forward some of those nutrients as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, and Jay, maybe just leave this up for now, but Kevin, in thinking about the system how it works in the West, you mentioned that soil biology working its way through, residue and those sorts of things, and certainly we see that as well. But this nutrient question is always a good one. I mean, moisture might be the most limiting, but obviously we want a cover crop that grows well, but also that, of course, releases those nutrients back. So what nutrient challenges are you facing with cover cropping in the West?
It's going back to for us, we're not growing corn, so it's not a nutrient pig, but we have this pig called canola that you just pour as much nutrients on it as you want, and if there's you go back to the organic situation. Now I'm working with producers that are organic, and they're this close to going zero till, and so there's one grower in northeast Saskatchewan. He put in a half a pound of Italian ryegrass with his oats, and the quarter right beside it, he just went straight oats. He said where the Italian ryegrass was, there's about 2 to 3 bushel less, but his weed pressure dropped by 80%. And so when we're looking at these weeds, when I'm doing my talks, I refer people to go out and buy When Weeds Talk by J.L. McCammon, a great resource, and what these weeds are telling us. And so when we have these cover crops, and when we have the diversity, we have the living root, for nitrogen on our farm in eastern Saskatchewan, being Ukrainian and Scottish, I'm cheap. And when I found out that over every square meter there's 440 metric tons of nitrogen, for the last 15 years on the farm, we did not buy any nitrogen. And then when I met Dr. Jones, she told me that in Western North America, we have about 1,500 years worth of phosphate in the soil. So as long as we're building mycorrhizae, as long as we're having the living root, as long as we're doing all, we don't need to add phosphate to most of our crops. So when we get the biology right, and when we get the living root, and when we get these soils functioning, in Western Canada, I'm working with a lot of producers that have gone to the zero fertilizer, and they are doing some amendments some years. I'm really big on using alfalfa pellets as a nutrient source. So nutrient deficiencies, yeah, they happen. And Dr. Lane Ingham, she says whenever you have a nutrient deficiency, it's mainly because you have a microbial deficiency. And so this is part of the reason why I don't get invited to a lot of the ag industry meetings anymore, because I'm bucking the trend of high inputs. And I worked for Western Ag Labs for 6 years. I studied under Jeff Shino for a year and a half. When I went to the farm, I was absolutely full chemical. When I learned about this biological system, farming became way easier. And still getting, this Y word, which Dr. Chris Nichols talks about. We have to get yield out of the termination of farmers. We need to talk about net revenue per acre, net profit.
The
And when I got
side.
rid of a lot of the chemicals on the farm, all of a sudden my profitability went up.
Yep. Now, although, so to me, the key here and the key part of that entire conversation, Kevin, is exactly that, is that you're adding what you need when you need it, and you're using plants to cycle nutrients, but also to feed that microbiome. And to me, it's very much like how we've shifted our thinking in livestock nutrition. We think less about feeding, for ruminants anyway, we think less about feeding the animal. We think about the rumen bugs, right? We have to take care of the rumen, because the rumen is actually what feeds the animal. So it is, it's a subtle shift, but it's an important one, I think, which is really cool. Now, we are running out of time, and this is an important point that I want to make. Jake, can you go back one slide? In talking about if we are going to potentially feed livestock, there are some considerations. Some of them are what we have to consider as far as herbicides. And Jim, we sort of started on this note of planning next year's cover crops this year, but important things to cover here. What do you want to remind people if they're thinking about using cover crops as forage?
Yeah, so important is to look at the labels that of the herbicides that you're using to terminate the crop. Understand the crop itself. Lyndsey talked about sorghum, and we talked about prussic acid risk with certain crops. There's also bloat risk if we're using particular cover crops, with especially some of the high protein, high soluble protein legumes. They can be a little risky at times. But I really want to hone in that watch those herbicide labels. Things like 2,4-D are not compatible with making a livestock feed after application, and there are withholds on of timing even before with fungicides and herbicides. So just read your labels, folks. It's really important stuff.
And just to add on to that, Jim, Crop Protection Hub has all that info kind of at your fingertips quickly. So just a plug for that, folks, check that out.
Yeah, it's super important to check and make sure. And in Jake, you're exactly right. It's super easy to double check. If you've got any questions, that resource is totally available, which is great. Kevin points out locally, and this is a key part, is locally the corn heat units have been reduced slightly to accommodate double cropping with a cover crop. This is something, Jake, I think, we talk about choosing our soybeans carefully so that we can get winter wheat in. But there's also, as we layer in cover crops, there's perhaps another side to this of, trying to find cover crop choices that are maybe more compatible with the growing season that we have. How do you sort of navigate that question of what we can get in? I know Kevin seeded crops every month of the year through the summer, but are farmers trying to figure out, ideal planting windows and trying to adjust their planting and seeding to hit some of those for the benefits? You're
talking, Lyndsey, about kind of cover crop species options to kind of fit in different windows.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. I think in field crops in Ontario, there's only so many combinations, and I guess my head starts spinning when I talk to my horticulture colleagues, because there's so many different kind of windows and opportunities and places to fit in cover crops. I mean, I think the areas that have been, explored, wheat after wheat and other cereals is the obvious big window. After soybeans, if wheat isn't seeded, there's an opportunity there. Kevin mentioned drones earlier on, and that's a project I'm involved with. And there's lots of others starting to utilize drones to see, can we not have to, haul the drill back out, but, just get it custom done, or potentially get a drone for the farm and be able to go in there, in late August, early September, get something established ahead of corn. And then the other one would be, similarly in the corn crop, can you get something, maybe after, but that can be, pretty late in the season. Sometimes the early season interseeding has been pretty hit and miss. And I don't know that I've yet met a grower who's really had a huge success with that and is doing that on every acre every year. It's still kind of experimental and not consistent enough.
Mm-hmm. Consistency matters. It's nice to make a decision and it works out, but they don't always. As promised, Producer Jay, if you would, Margaret May is anxiously waiting. Ring those phones, everybody. Just kidding. Send her an email. So if you need that credit for that knowledge sharing event, that KSE, zip Margaret an email. There's a password. No, I'm just kidding. Just send her an email. And if you have to verify, it's that I have sheep. That's the secret question. Okay. So leave that up for a bit, Jay, as we wind down here. Pretty fantastic, I think. And Jake, you hit the nail on the head. Sometimes I think like, hey, this is pretty complicated. And then you're right. Then like try and grow carrots or onions or all these other things that our horticulture friends grow. No thanks. Gord Spexinator had a really good question that we can't really answer tonight, but Gord, zip me an email. Would love to chat about it because I think it is an important one, and maybe Jim wants to talk about it too. We can talk about it on the Soil Network. But the question of if you are going to graze off a cover crop, how does that work as far as an agreement? And so I think that's a really important conversation to have. So if you are the farmer that wants to have cover crops, but you prefer the idea of them being grazed off in the fall versus either spraying or forage harvest, whatever it may be, make sure you have that conversation of, who pays to put the crop in, who's bringing the fences, etc. From our experience, we have done both. We have bought the seed and put the crop in, or we have come after it's already done, but in both instances we bring the fence and the sheep and we take care of all the daily maintenance and the trucking and all those sorts of things, and for the most part the benefits sort of the costs and the benefits sort of equal out, so that is working well for us, but definitely it's the conversation to have, and I would just recommend try it 1 year and see how it goes, and maybe adjust after that, because it's pretty cool. So anyway, zip me an email, Gord. Okay, Jake, Jim, Kevin, thank you so much. This was so much fun. Thank you all for saying yes and for sharing your knowledge and your time. I really appreciate it. Kevin, I'm still mad about the 20 degrees, but I'm going to get over it. So thank you everyone for joining us. A quick note, next week on Monday, there is no episode because the Real Agriculture team is convening to have our annual summit. And so we're actually going to take Monday night off so Jay and I can actually see our coworkers. I know, weird. But just so everybody knows, but we'll be back, of course, on the 21st. And I do have the 28th book. We're going to talk PGR timing on cereals. So check that out. Gentlemen, thank you so much. And we'll see you in 2 weeks here on the Agronomist. Cheers, everybody.